Forgive me for playing two roles. We really are envisioning this as a roundtable. So we're each going to speak for 5-ish minutes, and then we would love to have a conversation with you all about some of the issues that we're going to bring up. I'm going to start. My name is Abby Purpose. We've met before. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the project that we are going to present on and sort of its infancy. And then what we're going to do is each person on this panel, in this roundtable, enter the project at a different phase. And what we really want to talk about is that process and what it means to have a longitudinal project with different people coming on at different points, what the challenges of that are, and framing it within the context of a project that is very much grounded in the immediacy of trauma and the immediacy of disaster and issues surrounding sort of community health and well-being. And so we are, I should probably tell you what this project is. This is a project called Staring Out to Sea. It started right after Hurricane Sandy, which made landfall in New Jersey in October of 2012. I teach at Kane University, which is in North Jersey, just outside of New York. The school was closed for 10 days after the storm. Our sort of major electrical system and everything was compromised. Students were sent home. Our students who span across the state had everything from a few downed trees to their entire houses washed away. There were gas shortages in the state, so students couldn't get to campus even after classes restarted. This was the context that I was operating in at that moment. And in December of 2012, I got a phone call from Kate Scott, who then was a board member of OHMAR, is now the vice president, who said, we just had our board meeting, and OHMAR would like to partner with someone teaching at a New Jersey school to do an oral history project on Sandy. We would like that professor to sort of take charge of it, but we'll be there in a support role. Do you know of anybody? I said, I've done a lot of oral history research. I've used oral history a lot in my own research, but I've never developed and designed and directed a large-scale project. I love the idea of doing that with the support of the regional organization. I was just finishing my first book, so the timing worked out really well, and I said, sure, let's give it a shot. This was in December. We had no idea what we were going to do. We had very limited resources. This was obviously a time-sensitive issue because the storm had just happened, and we had no money. So we didn't know what to do, and after some brainstorming and some talking with, luckily, what ended up being a very supportive department and very supportive administration at Kane, and we were really fortunate in that regard. We decided to develop the project in the classroom. So students were in the midst of finals. They had all registered for their classes already, and we put out a call and said, we're going to teach this. I'm going to teach this advanced oral history methods class in the spring. It's going to be about Sandy. We don't know what that means yet, but you will learn the process and practice of doing oral history, and then you will have a hand in designing this project. And I had 6 students sign up. And so we met for the first time in January, and between December and January, I spoke to just this amazing resource base that OHMAR has. Linda Shopes and Stephen Sloan and Deanne Porter, and all of these people that people in OHMAR were able to connect me with to talk about what it meant to do oral history work in the wake of natural disaster and the issues of immediacy and trauma and destabilization and all of those things that you have to think about when you're doing that work. So I worked with 6 students that semester. I did sort of an oral history boot camp with them, and then we very, very collaboratively developed this project. So we did everything from coming up with the title together. One of the students was very fond of alliteration, so we got to Staring Out to Sea. We thought about the geographic parameters and landed on the Bayshore area, which is just across the Sandy Hook Bay from Staten Island. We came up with a list of themes, we came up with a list of questions. They did practice interviews. They went in the field and did what we call field interviews with subjects. They did recruitment. They went to community meetings. They talked about the project. And then in in April of 2013, we all traveled down to DC together and presented at the OHMAR conference that year. And that was sort of the pinnacle of the project, the culmination of it. We didn't really know where it would go from there. because their semester was ending. And I had applied for about $100,000 worth of grants. None of them came through. So three of them ended up staying on to do independent studies and internships with me. So we were able to extend it through December, and then we were kind of lost. I was also pregnant by December and getting ready to have a baby and moving in different directions, and sort of said, okay, well, this was an amazing experience and a great learning experience, and hopefully I'll be able to come back to it and we'll see where it goes. And it floundered a little bit for 5 or 6 months. And then Dan, who was a good friend of mine from graduate school, emailed me and said, hey, I just got this great visiting position at Richard Stockton, now University, which is another New Jersey state school, and I'm teaching a digital humanities class. What do you think of us piggybacking on the project and turning your interviews into a website? And I said, great, let's talk about what that would mean.
Yeah, so last summer I had just taken a visiting assistant professorship at Richard Stockton College, now Stockton University. And I had the idea that for this class that I was going to be teaching in digital humanities, that I wanted to orient that course around a kind of big class project. And so I was thinking, what could we do? What could we make this project be about? And I remembered Abby's project, the Staring Out to Sea Oral History project, and thought that maybe this would be a good, good basis for us to work with. I also have a lot of training as an oral historian. I have my own oral history project that was part of my dissertation research. I had done some digital humanities work, and so I thought, maybe this would be a good way to bring those two things together. I had also heard about this platform, OHMS, the Oral History Metadata Synchronizer, that's developed by the Louis Nunn Center at the Louis Nunn. Make that French for some reason. Louis Nunn Center at the University of Kentucky to make oral history available and accessible and usable online. And so I thought maybe this would be a good tool for us to use to put these interviews on the web, and maybe we could do some other stuff with them as well. So Abby was very generous, and having a newborn at home, and agreed to kind of come together with me on this project. And so it started the course, and we took the interviews and built this website, which we built in WordPress, but it's organized around the interviews that students did with each other. Here we go. So each of these interviews has been indexed using OHMS.
Today's date is March 5th.
But this is what the students did, is took each of these interviews and broke them down into segments and assigned a synopsis and a set of keyword tags to each of them. And some of them also have geographical information. Some of them have images associated with them as well. But this is the kind of thing that you can do in OHMS, and this is what the students did. For all of the interviews that Abby students had done with each other, and then for all of the interviews that they did in the field. And we have a lot more that are due to be added that we're working on indexing now, as well as trying to think of other ways that we can kind of build this project out to include maybe some textual visualization, some mapping visualization, taking kind of what OHMS spits out, which is a marked up XML file, and thinking about how that can be the basis for other kinds of ways of interacting with this material. It would be really great to see more people using OHMS in this way, because what the platform needs right now is a really interested and invested community of users, because while OHMS is great, it lacks some of the functionality that would really kind of Make It Sing as a digital tool. So you can search within an interview, search within the index, and search within the transcript for key terms. You can search for keywords, or I'm sorry, you can search the transcript text. You can also search for the keyword terms that are assigned to each segment. But one, kind of thing that would be really useful that you can't do right now is you can't search across multiple interviews. So that's the kind of functionality that we would like to see OHMS develop in the future, but without a community of people who are using it regularly, that's unlikely to happen. So I'm hoping that this project will help highlight the things that you can do with OHMS that will help get people interested and develop that community of users. So right now, we're continuing to work on the website, and one of the students from the digital humanities class, Chelsea Mendoza, has been working in an independent study capacity to do really great work indexing these interviews. So I'll hand it over to you, Chelsea, if you want to talk about the class and what you're doing now.
Hi everyone, my name is Chelsea. I am a student at the now Stockton University. I am a junior. I major in criminal justice. I originally took digital humanities, this was my first semester at Stockton University. I really didn't know what to expect at all. Like I remember in class, we were just thinking about what we were going to expect. But honestly, after we learned a lot of technical terms of what digital humanities was and how we can use it now in this world. And after a while, I started to kind of understand more and more about what we were doing. But I really, really began to enjoy myself when we started this actual project with the Staring Out to Sea. Us as a class, like he said, we got the transcripts, and some of us were able to try to edit it with the Baylor style guide. And after that, we would go and upload it onto OHMS, and we would do, like he said, we would segment it off, give titles, segment synopsis, GPS coordinates if that was possible, keywords, and we also were able to, as a class, come up with like 1,000-word list of keywords that we saw in the transcripts that pretty much kept coming over and over, or keywords or phrases that we would see repeating over and over in some of these interviews, just to kind of group them together. So when we are able to search over the mass interviews, it's easier to find what you're looking for. So we did use the keywords, and we also were able to sync the audio interviews to the transcript, the actual transcript. So that was pretty interesting, but as a whole, I really enjoyed it, and I kind of became a little good at it, if I can say so myself.
I'll vouch for that.
So yeah, honestly, as we started getting deeper and deeper into the project, I started to kind of get the gist of what exactly we were doing, because personally myself, I wasn't affected by Hurricane Sandy. I am a Jersey City native, but my family, we were stationed in Oklahoma with the Army, so at that time we really didn't know too much. We just knew what was pretty much presented to us by the news, and we didn't have firsthand views like others may have. So when we started reading these transcripts, I got a way better idea of what exactly was going on. Of course, you really don't know what happens unless you're there, and the fact that these people opened up to us and opened up to you guys, I'm sorry, and shared their experiences, very amazing. And sometimes some people don't share their experiences, so what happens if no one shares their experience? No one will really know the backstory and what really happened. So I was very amazed and grateful to be able to, get into these people's shoes in a way and see exactly what they had to do. So yeah, that was that was kind of where it clicked for me. So definitely after that, I was like, I would love to continue with this project. And Daniel Royals, he actually offered me independent study for the next semester. So I was very excited about that. I didn't even know I was getting class credit for that, honestly. I was just like, yeah, sure. But I continued. At first, I kind of reviewed the other interviews as well, and after that, we got some new interviews, so I did the same thing. I reviewed them under the Baylor Style Guide and uploaded them onto OHMS, and I'm still in the process of indexing them. And in the future, there's already Twitter available for it, as in for like the promotion of the actual website and the project. There's already a Twitter available for it. We are now working on the Facebook page for it, and we're trying to get some more social media aspects out so that we can get the word out more about this project. So that's something that we're looking forward into the future. And so during my first semester with the actual class and not the digital humanities, what it was that like we had I think it was the final class, where Abby actually came to our class and she spoke to us, and we were talking about what we thought was unique about this class rather than other classes, and this is kind of what made me even stay even more for the independent study, was that you can have any other class in college, you can have math, you can have reading, and okay, a teacher teaches you something, you remember it, and study for the test, you get the A, and then I know for math is definitely not my strong suit, so if you ask me to recite an algebraic formula to you right now, I'm sorry, I would look at you like I don't even know. But with this project, it's definitely something so much more unique, because at the end of the day, a math test, where's that going to go? That's probably going to go in the garbage, but you'll probably remember most of it. But with this, you actually have like concrete evidence that you've done it, like, you know, with the actual website, and you can show someone, hey mom, look at what I've done in class today. So I thought that was really amazing and unique about this class, and that along with the fact that you got to experience it from the interviews, what exactly happened during Hurricane Sandy was pretty much what sold me and got me very deeply invested in this.
Okay. Hi guys, my name's Kai. I'm actually the last team member to join the team. I'm one of Dr. Purgis's students up at Kean University, so I'm from North Jersey. I am a senior this year, so I will be graduating this upcoming May. And I started on the project in December. Like Chelsea, I was also offered an independent study, and I have done oral history research before. My junior year, I was lucky to get an internship doing an oral history project. It was definitely a lot different though. It was something where, as Chelsea said, this is something that I can go home and show my parents. This is what I'm doing. With my internship though, it was more of just back research of a church, and it was very special. It was a unique opportunity, but this has been more of a journey for me, definitely. To prepare for this, one of the biggest things that happened was that I learned how to start to form a relationship with people that I've never met before. Most of the people that I have met so far with all of the people have already been interviewed by another member of the team, Dr. Curtis's first group of students. So it was definitely a bit of an obstacle for me going in and making a relationship with these people who 2 years before already made a relationship with a different student. That was pretty much my biggest fear going in. Luckily, it was in reality not one at all, which I was definitely thankful for. Most of the people that I have gotten to interview so far, they were very helpful. As with the online transcriptions, one of the great things was that I was able to actually hear the first set of interviews, and I was able to piggyback off of that to do my interviews, especially with coming up with questions. When Dr. Purgis and I came up with the questions that we would interview, it was definitely a little bit different now, being that it's been 2 years later. The emergency aftermath is no longer there. It's more of a rebuild and what has happened since. And a lot of people's opinions and their ideas of what they felt at that time are a lot different at this point. Coming in as a new team member, especially 2 years later in the game, it definitely gave me a different outlook. I'm from North Jersey as well, so luckily I'm not by any water, so I didn't face any issues with my house flooding, anything like that. The basement flooded, but we did lose power for about 2 weeks. I live very close to school, so that was definitely an experience that I would not like to go through again. But it was definitely unique coming in because I had faced this Hurricane Sandy as well, but coming in with the aftermath and not being in that original emergency standpoint, it gave a different outlook for me. One of the great things about that was that I was able to see how over 2 years people have changed. I know that my personal views of the storm have changed over these last few years, looking back at it, looking at the shore. It's definitely a big difference. And seeing what these people thought in emergency mode and just the pure panic that people were in, and now seeing how different they are, it's definitely something that has been one of the most beneficial things for me. I am still conducting interviews at this time, so I'm not done with my project yet. I will be continuing during the summer with this as well. So far to date, I have completed about 5 follow-up interviews. So it's definitely one of the biggest things for me that I have loved seeing is that people's outlooks, in some parts they have stayed very similar, but now being 2 years later, the fact that they can tell how much help they've received and what they thought they were receiving at that time versus now what they are and what they have gotten is definitely, it's very different. One of our questions that we did come up with was, what was your legacy of the storm and how do you remember this? And a lot of people have stuck with that same legacy, not knowing that I have received their first interviews. So seeing that and not knowing that that I already knew their former legacy and them not changing it now, 2 years later, it's definitely been an eye-opener for me, at least. I definitely didn't realize the effects that connecting with someone one-on-one would have during my first oral history. It wasn't so much of a personal level. I wasn't in people's homes, and I was able to see personally with actually my last interview, his home, he just finished raising his house, and now 2.5 years later, he's just finishing this project, and Hurricane Sandy hit in 2012. So it's definitely, it's something that is ongoing, which was the biggest surprise to me. It's something that people are still being affected by greatly. I know some of the people that I have interviewed and have set up interviews with did let me know that they cannot do them in their homes because they are still not back there. So it is something that is definitely a change and a challenge. One of the best eye-openers, though, is that I am directly in that place with them, and I'm seeing what they've personally gone through, as well as knowing my background and what I've gone through the storm. So that's definitely the most unique part for me.
So just a status update. A year ago, the project felt like it was dead in the water. I felt pretty defeated by the sort of constant lack of affirmation. We had great affirmation on some levels and the lack of validation in terms of grant support and people's interest in seeing it continue. And just over the past year, I mean, we have this amazing website. We're now conducting follow-up interviews with all of the 40 original interviewees, so it'll be a longitudinal study. We've received funding, now that we have the prototype for the website, we've received funding from the New Jersey Council for the Humanities and the Historical Commission. Dan and I are writing invited essays for the OHR. We're working on a book proposal. Like, all of these things sort of happened because of this unexpected collaboration.
Yeah.
And there have been challenges with it, as Kai said, like taking on somebody's project when you weren't part of it originally is tough. But it's also been pretty remarkable to see the life running. No questions?
You say that these interviewees came from a particular, I'll call it a neighborhood, say on the border of Staten Island, across the Staten Island. Is there any plan on going beyond on the Jersey Shore or other places that may have?
So we chose, the Bay Shore is a series of contiguous neighborhoods. And we chose 3 neighborhoods along the Bay Shore, Union Beach, Keansburg, and Port Monmouth, because they were really close geographically but very diverse demographically. And we really wanted to look at issues of sort of power and race and representation in the aftermath of the storm. And 2 of our original students were from there, so they were able to do heavy recruitment. The 3 students that I mentioned who continued on with the project got connected with a museum in South Jersey called the Tuckerton Seaport. And they created a museum exhibit on the storm and then also did a bunch of interviews in Tuckerton and the surrounding Long Beach Island neighborhoods around it. So that was our base for the 40 interviews, about 30 up in, is that right? About
Yes.
30 on the Bay Shore and 10 down in the Tuckerton area. And we're not conducting any new interviews. We're just doing follow-ups now.
And they are very close, like I said, geographically. I know my first set of interviews, I did 4 in one day. So it was definitely seeing the ongoing process of meeting with 4 different people that I've never met before for this project. And they were all in different locations, but geographically I was able to meet with all of them, and they were all in about a 10-minute range, but they were all from different towns in different places. So it was nice seeing it, how the effects hit in such a close range, but just because they were different towns, it hit them all very differently.
And that we really wanted it to be focused geographically so that we can look at those demographic variables.
Did you do any interviews with first responders that might provide lessons learned for, hopefully there won't be a next one, but if there is a next one?
So in the original set of interviews, most first responders and municipal folks weren't able to. I'm now sort of ancillary to the project, more for the book, doing interviews with some first responders, some FEMA folks, some government agencies. The Christie administration is not so keen on talking to us.
I'm thinking because my husband is a police officer in Brick, and they have a piece of the barrier island, and he was essentially gone for at least a month. So I kept saying in my head, I'm an oral historian, I need to go interview the guys. And he's like, we have no time for you right now. Like, no, this is crazy. I'm not taking you to the barrier island with me so you can do oral history interviews.
But now they do.
Yeah.
I would love to get your contact
I'm
information with your husband.
Yeah, absolutely.
What reservations, if any, did you have collecting these interviews so close to the event?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. We were really sensitive to the issues of trauma and sensitive to not wanting to re-traumatize the people that we were interviewing, but also in terms of the students. They're collecting all of these really horrifying stories, and so what effect that would have on them. So that was one of the challenges of doing such immediate post-disaster work. The others were connecting with people. I mean, people aren't, many people aren't in their homes. So how do we find them? And actually, that created a much unanticipated problem in terms of who we got to speak to. People in Keansburg, of the 3 neighborhoods, tends to be the lowest socioeconomically and the least white. And they have the least representation, the neighborhood has the least representation in terms of government and sort of people advocating for them. And I really thought we would be able to look at this specifically racially and to think about, in the aftermath of Katrina, race became such an important indicator. Nobody was left in Keansburg. So we have this unexpected silence on the issue of race because we don't have those voices. And that's actually something that the book will address. But that ended up being something that we hadn't anticipated going in. On the trauma issue, we brought in a psychologist and a graduate student in psychology to do some trauma training with the students before they went into the field. And all 6 of them said that was probably the most powerful and important piece of the class before going into the field.
One of the things with that as well, doing follow-up, one of the interviews that I conducted were supposed to be with a husband and a wife. And over the last 2 years, unfortunately, his wife passed away between the first interview where they were able to interview both him and his wife, and my interview where contacting them both, it was Mr. and Mrs. and finding out that she was unfortunately no longer with us. So that was one of probably like the biggest challenges I faced, is contacting people and not knowing if 2 years later they may not be answering because unfortunately they may not be with us any longer. So that was probably one of the biggest challenges I've faced so far.
Are you doing anything to track the listenership or the accesses to these records?
Because it's with WordPress, we have kind of basic analytics, which traffic so far has not been, booming. But that's part of the social media presence that we're trying to develop, is to, kind of promote the site and get more people, get more traffic to it. But I think Naomi in the Graying of It, in her presentation on the Graying of It's kind of addressed this. But we do kind of assume that if you build a great website, that people will come to it, and that's not true. It's maybe the thing that we think about the least, that if we're thinking about how to do this with the mindset of doing public history, that we really need to consider more, is how to actually engage communities online, and that's a lot more difficult than people think it is and that we expect it to be. And it really pays to kind of think deliberately about that and get some specific training around that. At the Digital Humanities Summer Institute, they have offered in the past a whole week-long session on community engagement that I hope that's been really useful. Trying to bring those lessons to this project, but yeah, so it's something that is more difficult than it sounds like it's going to be, and if you're thinking about putting stuff online, it really pays to think concretely and deliberately about it.
Also, there is a tab on the website that allows you to pretty much share your own story. If you were affected by Hurricane Sandy, you're allowed to, there's a dialogue box where you can put name, information, your email even, and just share your story pretty much, and be able to become like those people who were interviewed, be able to have people access your story and people to pretty much step in your shoes for a little while they're reading what has happened to you. So I think that's a pretty interesting part of the site for others who have not yet been interviewed but who have been affected and who would like to share their story to others.
That's ultimately be available for public consumption as well, right?
When we get some, we haven't yet. Yeah.
In terms of the interactive component where you're having people responding, do you have someone who has to administer and to get rid of the old spam that people get on websites and blogs where there's any kind of response available? How have you handled that?
Hasn't been a problem yet. We haven't had any submissions yet.
This is really in prototype.
Yeah, but I mean, using WordPress, you have kind of basic spam blocking tools. So yeah, I mean, if you were to get a lot of traffic, and if that were to become a very active part of the site, then you would encounter the problem of kind of management and curation, which we haven't had to think about.
We hope we have that problem.
Yeah, but I have another project that is built with Omeka that is kind of on the same idea of crowdsourcing an archive, or crowdsourcing the archiving of materials, and it's the same issue of you can build a website, it doesn't mean that people are going to come to it. You have to really actively promote it, and that's maybe in some ways like the invisible labor of projects like this, is that also takes a lot of time. Using social media for not just personal, but for a deliberate specific purpose, does take a lot of time. It's something that you need to think about.
Sort of a follow-up. How do you measure success then? Is it the number of people who access this, or is it perhaps more about the quality of the work that you put into it? Yeah. What is successful?
I guess it's the process versus product a little bit.
Yeah.
We had to write that into the grant application for the digital piece, and we struggled with how to talk about those measurements.
Yeah. I mean, you can think about success in different ways. You know, as you said, the quality of the product, the number of site views. WordPress analytics are pretty basic. So, you know, you get kind of number of views, number of visitors. You can have much more sophisticated analytics that are, you know, your bounce rate, how long people stay on the page, you know, how people navigate through the different pages within the site. So you can, you know, think about that kind of in more or less granular terms. For me, as somebody who is interested in seeing this platform, you know, seeing this site develop, but seeing more people use OHMS, for me, that would be a measure of success, is if, you know, people saw this and were, you know, driven or inspired to do similar projects using the indexing platform. That would be a measure of success for me outside of this project.
Well, I think this gets at a really important question of audience.
Yeah.
And this is a project that started in the classroom. Like it wasn't just a pedagogical exercise, but it very much served pedagogical purposes. So for the students to have a good experience and for them to have a meaningful experience is one measure of success. And we can do that by looking at the quality of the work they produce. We can do that through, you know, active reflection. And, you know, there were 6 students in the class and 10-ish in your class.
Yeah, 10 or 11.
Right, and
Yeah.
then 4 or 5 who've done independent studies. So we can measure that relatively qualitatively. Then there's the product question, right? Like, what are we putting out there for general consumption, for consumption by oral historians, by people looking to use this for something? But then there's also the people that are being interviewed. And for them, this is very much a way of healing, a way of finding affirmation in their experience. I mean, we as oral historians have all done work where the process of conducting the oral history is empowering for the interviewer. So we've thought about all 3 of those as benchmarks for success. And sometimes they're in conflict with each other. Like, a really meaningful pedagogical experience doesn't necessarily translate into a really snazzy, sexy product. So we've had to, I mean, Dan and I were just talking before this started, we didn't think about those things necessarily ahead of time because this all emerged pretty organically. Were I going back and doing this a second time, I probably would think about those goals ahead of time and how and what those goals were, like what felt important, where the priorities were, and then thought about the measurements for them.
And then if I could just add to that, in teaching the digital humanities class, I also had it in my mind that we had a responsibility to our community partner, if you want to think of it in more market terms, our client, which was Abby and the project. And so striking a balance between having, as Abby said, a meaningful pedagogical experience or a meaningful learning experience, which very often I think means making it okay for students to fail in some ways. That doesn't necessarily line up with having a quality product that will satisfy the community partner or the client that you're working for. And so striking that balance was sometimes challenging. I've been very lucky to have Chelsea stay on in the independent study capacity because she does such great work and was able to kind of tie up some loose ends that were left from the original course. All of the students in the course were great, of course. But, you know, some had, their levels of investment in the project varied. So had I not had Chelsea to do that and get credit for it, I would be left to do that myself, or, you know, Abby and I would be left to do that ourselves. And, you know, that would be really challenging. But in thinking about the design of, you know, these courses and the design of the assignments that we do with them, still an open question, I guess, yeah, but something to think about.
A quick question, in the measurement of success, the 6 students who did the interviews,
I assume they've mostly graduated. Have they built on this experience as a springboard for what they're doing now?
That's a really good question. I've been talking to some of them quite a bit in building the website. None of them are doing oral history work specifically. One of them actually thought pretty seriously about going into a master's program for oral history and then got into Teach for America, and she had been a history ed major, and that was a good path for her. They are all using the experience in various ways. One of them, who is actually a senior at Kane now, told me recently that the work with this project has become a catalyst for her to want to do community development in her own community and create some community-supported businesses to sort of work within communities to help. One of them is a law student, but he says that the analytical skills that he gained from trying to read these interviews and read them critically has been really helpful in law school. So I think that they're all using it. I think that the essay that I wrote for the OHR is really about how this actually became a tool for empowerment for the students, which was a totally unintended benefit. They still talk about, like, I'm connected with a number of them on social media, and they will, every so often, they'll post something about it. Or last year, we presented at the OHA in 2013, and on the 1-year anniversary of it, one of them posted about the fact that it was the 1 year, and then posted an email that she had received from our chair following up, and just how successful it made her feel. So it had really amazing consequences for those students, though they're not necessarily doing the work that it trained them to.
You mentioned that you wanted to focus on race and power in this. How did you find people to interview, and how did you make sure that they represented a good mix on the socioeconomic and racial strata?
So part of that was by virtue of the neighborhoods we chose. They're next to each other, north to south, east to west, east to west, north to south. Okay. And they moved from relatively well-off, largely white, to relatively struggling, largely African American, mostly. And so we thought, okay, we have these 3 neighborhoods. By virtue of looking in these 3 neighborhoods, we will necessarily get a sampling, a diverse sampling, which happened actually socioeconomically. And as I said, it didn't happen racially. And I think that's in large part because of our access points. The students who had connections to the neighborhood, they were both white, but their communities were largely white. And we were doing, we were attending community meetings. We were going to speak on, do presentations, VFWs and stuff. But the audiences, because those 2 students connected with us with them, they tended to be from their own communities. We have some racial diversity. We would have had more racial diversity, I think, if the neighborhoods had remained what they were before the storm. Because we ended up connecting with senior centers and a number of nonprofits that started after the storm, and they connected us with people to interview. So, I mean, the shorter answer is snowball sampling. The longer answer is it wasn't quite what we expected it to be.
With that too, one of the interviewees that I recently interviewed, she was from Hazlitt, and her son lives in Keensburg, and just hearing the difference between the 2 towns, which are pretty different socioeconomically,
but very close.
Yes, they're about like 5 to 10 minute just driving range. It was definitely a very big difference in the story, and she did show me pictures of her area and her home versus where her son is, and her son's neighborhood is still boarded up to this day, and there are homes that are just, no one knows where the people went. And it's kind of like you're in this neighborhood that is completely surrounded, and you know your neighbors, and then the storm hits and you have no clue what happened to them. So just hearing that, it was definitely, and seeing the pictures, just from what the support has happened after that versus town for town, it was definitely a big difference seeing the economic differences with that.
Given the geographic questions that you've
raised, and I'm kind of surprised. Maybe I looked briefly online. I didn't see anything involving maps.
We're getting there.
Working on it.
Okay, so I was curious if GIS or any other form of digital mapping was involved, because it would be fascinating to see both where these interviews were collected, but also a little bit about major landmarks or common points of reference, or if like neighborhoods changed before and after photographs, if they're going, that could be linked, for example, through a map interface or something.
Those are great ideas.
And those were ideas that the students in the class came up with.
Yeah, oh good. Yeah, but I mean, the time that we had in the semester to actually do that, we just didn't have. I should say that when we started the class, I was learning the OHMS platform at the same time as the students were.
And I was transcribing the interview.
Yeah, so we, did not have, we could have done more front-end work to ensure like back-end success. But one of the things that we had envisioned that we would do kind of towards the end of the semester was some kind of mapping feature, mapping visualization. Still, we have planned to do. And the XML file that OHMS spits out could be really useful in doing that. I think we need to do some more, some additional tagging. But one of the things that I would like to explore as we develop this project is, having a standard XML format for doing, for marking out oral histories, and then, tagging landmarks, as they get mentioned in the transcripts, and then putting those into some kind of mapping visualization that ideally would be like, interactive, where you can select or deselect narrators based on their, location, or age, whatever, and, see how the keywords that they use change, or, see how the topics that their interview covers change. So definitely something that we have in mind, but, are a little resource limited still and time limited at this point. But yeah, no, I agree, great idea.
What Dan just said was probably the biggest lesson that had come out of this collaboration, which we just talked about recently, for the OHR essays.
Yeah.
So Dan emailed me in June-ish.
No, it was later. It was like July. It was all August.
And I was on maternity leave. And so we were like, this is a great idea.
Yeah.
We have 6 interviews transcribed.
Yeah.
And they were transcribed by students who had never done transcriptions before. So they were really rough. And we had 34 others to transcribe. So I feverishly spent the early part of the fall trying to transcribe as he feverishly tried to edit. It was a mess.
It was
and a good learning experience for the two of us. And it ultimately led to good stuff.
Yeah, no.
I think we would both do that a little bit differently.
Definitely a little bit differently. But also, kind of figuring out OHMS as we were going along, that could have been more effective. But, good learning experiences. And the piece that I'm doing for OHR will address some of those things, like, what we could have done earlier to make sure that we didn't run into a time crunch, for things that I learned about the platform that would have been really useful to know earlier, because OHMS too is a kind of bootstrappy effort. It's basically Doug Boyd does it, and he's one person, and so. But yeah, that essay will address some of those things. Yeah.
I'd just like to add that one of the great things about digital tools like OHMS is that is the standardization. So, for instance, if someone else were to do a mapping Superstorm Sandy project, they could grab your data and use it to build this interactive map.
Yeah.
So it's another great reason to use tools like OHMS because they help aid collaboration and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
I had a question. You spoke about the silence of Kingsborough and about the fact that it's all boarded up. And I was wondering if you we're considering adding a visual component of before and after photographs of these regions, because it would help fill the silence.
Yeah.
To have that visualization of, you know, my God, the town is completely gone and it's scattered and no one knows where anyone is.
It's a really
it would
good
be very
idea.
compelling.
Are there some blog?
There are some photos that students took on the blog.
Okay.
Someone just, again, all of this kind of has happened organically and we're following and seeing where it goes. Somebody just approached me and Dan about the possibility of building an exhibit out of this. And so we have a meeting in a few weeks to talk about what it would be like to create a visual exhibit out of an oral history project. And I think those are some of the questions that we'll talk about there and we'll translate to the website and to the book. Thank you, I appreciate that. And
Oh, I had a really simple one. OHMS, OHMS?
Homes.
OHMS.
Yeah.
That's what I wanted to know.
I was curious about the age range of the people you were interviewing. I know you started with about 40 people, so does it range? Because I'm wondering if a younger generation has a totally different perspective than an older generation.
Yeah. So you want to, if they differ?
they do range. I
They
wish I could tell you what the actual age range was too.
I would say because the project includes the interviews that students did with each other.
That's true.
So they go pretty young, down to early 20s,
Yeah.
18?
20 was the youngest.
Okay, so 20 to at least 80 because a number of the interviews were done in a senior citizens home.
Okay.
So I would ballpark 20 to 80.
I actually had one that was in the 84.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
We haven't done enough of the analysis of the interviews to know about broader differences, but it's a good point. It's something we should think about generation.
Mm-hmm.
Are you going in with a set of questions that you're asking? Is it the same set of questions you asked the first time, and you're measuring whether their perspective has changed over the years?
The questions that we came up with, they were kind of altered a bit, but a lot of them were the same follow-up questions. So how they felt about, for instance, a set of them were how they felt about the support that they got from different levels of government. So from local to the federal government, how they felt about Governor Christie, since he was our governor at that time.
That's why he doesn't like it.
At that time, and how they felt about him now in regards to his help, and how they felt about President Obama and his promises over the time. So I think that some of the questions definitely are the same, but there were some added ones in there based off of new information that we received, and one executive order question that we added.
That Kai did the research on and decided was a relevant question.
In January, I think it just happened in January of this year. So still 2 years later, President Obama made an executive order about lifting houses and flood zones and how they have to be raised now. So that was something that we added that we couldn't access because it hadn't happened yet. So that was something that people, it piggybacked onto their views of how really the government played a role in the different time periods, and knowing now that they've already gone through it for 2 years, how the difference between how they felt about it then versus how they feel about it now, going through all that time has changed.
It's a shorter list of questions now and really about follow-up.
Dealing with disaster and interviewing survivors of disasters, I imagine, I don't have to imagine, I know that these have got to be very traumatic interviews.
Yeah.
Kaya, could you, did any of them stand out in your mind as being completely mind-blowing? You went home that night and thought, oh my God, I can't believe I heard this.
Yes. The last interview I did was with a gentleman named Robert Polsch, and he was the gentleman whose wife happened to pass away. And he was definitely my most interactive. I met with him in his home, and he was able to show me pictures from growing up in Fort Monmouth to right now, and the differences and the stories that he told me, his whole, basically, first floor, his basement were completely ruined. So it was really like heart-wrenching just hearing him talk about it and like being face-to-face with him, and you could see the emotions. Like, I got emotional from it just because it was traumatic for him, and he ended up having to rebuild basically his whole home. And that one stood out the most to me because he actually has a handicapped daughter who lives with him, and the house is very handicap accessible, and because of the water damage, some of those things stopped working. And going into his basement, he had a lift for his daughter, and it was ruined. And just seeing him have to rebuild basically from scratch in a home that he actually got from his parents. He was actually the oldest person that I've interviewed so far. He's 84. So just going through that with him and going through all those times, it was rough. And just hearing the stories with that, it was definitely...
Probably good for him.
Yeah, definitely.
You can imagine starting out life again at age 84, starting from scratch. Yeah.
I'd just like to say that I think this is really important, really powerful. I don't know if in your research you came across information about a little town in New York called Breezy Point that had lots of damage and was big fire. That's my neighborhood. That's where I'm from. Yeah. So I truly do resonate with a lot of these people's stories, especially with the follow-ups. It's 2 years later, we're still not done. So I'd love to talk with you later about me and my family's experience.
Yeah. There's actually a lot of oral history work being done on Sandy in New York. So we could connect you with some of those, but I would love to hear your stories too. Thank you.
Practical aspect, what equipment are you using, and do you find it useful? Can you recommend it, or would you not recommend it?
For the interviews?
Are you using audio? I say good. So what?
Yeah, we got lucky. We got funding from the university for these amazing Tascam recorders. They're like $500 each, and they arrived about 3 hours before the first student was able to hear the interview. So we have these great recorders, and most of the interviews have been recorded on them. The students ended up teaching themselves basically how to use them. Kai, you've done all your interviews on your phone.
Yeah, I actually, Dr. Fergus found me an app to download, which worked a lot better for me just being in the technology generation. It was nice because here I have my phone, and I was able to actually upload them onto Google Drive from my phone, and the complete interview was there. So it was nice because just sit it down and go right ahead. Difficult technology, I'm not very technology savvy. I like my gadgets and I enjoy them, but it's nice because it's simple, but it worked out so well.
What's that app called?
I have it. I'll check.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we actually just got funding to get some video equipment. We're debating whether we should use it for that because the idea was potentially to do all of the follow-ups on video to have sort of some different mediums. But since we've started them already, and Kai will probably have done like a quarter of them before the end of the semester, which because of when the grant starts, we can't get the equipment until June. We're debating whether the money would be better used for transcripts. So if anybody has any suggestions on whether doing some of the interviews but not all of them on video, I would welcome it.
What is the benefit to using the app over the recorder that comes built into the phone?
I know for my phone at least, the app worked a lot better because I was able to upload it right onto Google Drive, which helped because I was able to just be able to send them to Dr. Burks an email like, hey, they're on there, it's done with, instead of the voice recorder that is on my phone, and I have a pretty up-to-date phone, the voice recorder that is on my phone, I wasn't able to email them because they were too long. Because,
Yeah, that's the problem I've been having.
my shortest interview, I think it was about 20 minutes, so unfortunately it was too long, and it was like, at this point, how am I going to get them so that they can be transcribed? But with the app, I was able to upload them right there. So
the app it's actually just called Recorder. It's a free app. I also have an app called Tape a Call because most of the experts I've been interviewing and the municipal folks and whatnot I've been doing on the phone. I paid for the pro version, which I think was $10, and I've had great luck with it. And I just pull them from the phone as soon as I finish and put them on my hard drive.
Yeah.
Because I used my iPhone recorder and the quality is amazing,
quality
better
is
than some of the
fantastic.
digital, but then I
That's
have
what
to
I
put it in
found.
iTunes, which is
Right,
annoying.
Yeah,
And the
yeah.
quality is really good on here. That was one of the things I was surprised about because, like, we were probably about this distance away, and I just really set my phone on the table, and the
Yeah.
quality was really good. So I was happy with that.
If I were doing this again, I would take the $2,500 that we got from Kane for equipment and put it toward transcription.
Yes, I would totally vote for that, yeah, absolutely.
Do you
My
use
students
an-
would too, having just.
Do you use an external mic with you, or is it just the built-in microphone?
Yeah.
Really?
You don't have a stand mic.
No,
Yeah.
no.
Oh, okay.
No, it's so good, you don't need to, I've used external recorders with traditional, digital recorders, and with the phone, you don't need it, so much easier.
There's actually a really good, another free app that I had used for my interview called Voice Record Pro 7. And you can put it in Dropbox, digital, Google Drive. Like, it has a whole list of different places where you can store your stuff. And it's excellent, and it has like a scale for like, it's called Voice Record Pro, VPR 7.
That's for, not for phone recordings, just for putting down and listening.
Yeah, you can put it down,
Yeah.
but it catches sound really easily.
Awesome, thank you.
I think that might be maybe like kind of in conjunction because that was some of the options with the recorder that we could put it in like Dropbox and things like that too.
It's just like a whole list of where
Yeah.
you want to go: email, Dropbox, Google Drive.
That's great.
It's huge.
The advantage of Voice Record Pro is it will let you record and wait.
Okay. I've been forwarding all of the interviews directly to Dan, and he's working his magic on figuring out what last three non-technological. What's the word?
Some interesting file formats. Some
Format,
interesting
thank you.
file extensions. That I've not seen before.
This project has made me really want to learn the digital.
Just to add, I'm assuming all of you are talking about iPhones. If you have an Android, it records directly at Wave, and you can just put it straight onto your computer.
Yeah.
You don't even have anything.
Great. We should have a workshop on that next year.
Yes.
On technological stuff.
Definitely.
Let's talk about it.
Yeah, let's do.
And so, wait, the advantage of recording in Wave is that it's uncompressed, right?
Yes.
Okay. So that's a sound quality and archiving issue, which, may be a more or less significant, depending on the investments in the project.
And what you're doing with it.
Yeah.
To shift gears, did you ask about climate change?
Yes. One of our major themes was sustainability and environmental issues, and climate change was part of that. I learned recently that the Christie, and I'm going to bash the Christie administration for a second, and I apologize if that offends anybody. The Christie administration had a policy where nobody in the government office was allowed to use the words climate change prior to Sandy. And that, at first, my husband was like, wait, does that apply to you as a state employee? He's like, God, I hope not. It doesn't apply outside of his actual office, but I think that has shifted some since Sandy, but they're still really resistant to talking about it. So we asked all of the interviewees about that, and their answers were pretty striking. Some of them said, no, this doesn't make me want to change my life at all. And others said, I'm going to become the biggest advocate for dealing with seawater rise I can. I've interviewed some folks that are working specifically with sea level rise in New Jersey, and in the next couple months I'm going to interview an official at NOAA on the topic. So yeah, that's something we're
Just staring out to sea while the sea's coming at us.
yeah. That's great.
Interestingly enough, I just attended a conference at the New Jersey Academic Alliance where a graduate student presented a paper comparing the storm of '62 to Sandy, and saying that the main difference he found in attitude is that people now take climate change much more seriously along the shore.
Yeah.
As a historian who basically I live in the 19th century, and I like it there. One of the things I keep wondering about digital technology like this, where you are recording history for posterity, is its sustainability over time. And this is something I don't know about because I'm a bit of a technical. I do have a blog of my own, but I sort of assume that someday it's going to disappear along with all the material on the 5 1/4-inch copies that are stacked up in my house. So I'm wondering how you think about that and how you deal with that.
In oral history?
In terms of digital projects of any kind.
Well, all those formats are subject to breakdown, whether
Yeah,
they're stored physically or whether they're stored digitally.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's something that we need to think about in oral history generally, but I mean, partial response to that is that's why we transcribe, right? You know, at least the transcript will survive.
And
That's the most durable format that we can do for this.
3 archives in the state that will house hard copies of the transcripts once we have everything completed. Maybe 4, actually. I think Rutgers, the big oral history center at Rutgers, New Brunswick is going to have some too.
Well, I'll just add that that is definitely one of the sort of new frontiers in archiving is the born digital, and it is sort of best practices are continuing to be worked out.
There was a big panel on that at the OHA at the national conference about that, and it was very well attended. And you had a lot of archivists, and they are thinking very hard about this, but it's difficult. You know, it just the only thing we know that lasts is paper so far, which is kind of ironic in a sense.
And the decay rate, not just for the storage of the material, but the platforms that we use to present it is actually really quick. I'm teaching an oral history class right now, and one of the assignments that I've given is for students to, briefly present a project that's available online. And some of those are not even that old, but are set up to run the interviews in like Real Player. And the computers, we can't do it anymore. And so, there's also the question of as we put stuff online, who's going to maintain it over the long term and make sure that the formats and the platforms still work with the latest Windows release, the latest OS release, or whatever.
We're lucky for this project because the website will ultimately be taken over by whatever, I don't want to name a publisher because we haven't signed a contract.
Right.
By the publisher that we're hoping to publish the book with. And so they'll do the keep of it.
Hopefully.
Right.
Because these projects are all ones that are attached, or for the most part are ones that are attached to, big institutions, big presses, but they need to have the incentive to attach somebody to do the labor on it, because all of these things do take time and work, and it's easy to forget.
Lunch, the Polk Award, and the business meeting are all back in the main room. If anybody has